The neighborhood sold itself as a picture of order. Freshly painted fences, manicured lawns trimmed like military haircuts, streets so quiet you could hear sprinklers tick in rhythm with the heartbeat of suburban perfection. But beneath that glossy calm lurked a council that believed in control more than community. An HOA board that treated bylaws like sacred scripture and gave its enforcers a swagger of self-appointed cops, the kind of men who strapped on green jackets with HOA stenciled. Across the back as if 3 letters made them law. For Marcus Hayes, a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s who had just returned from decades of military service as a decorated Navy SEAL commander, the move to this cul-de-sac was supposed to be the start of quiet. No missions, no call-outs, no brothers-in-arms bleeding beside him. Just a home where his wife could plant flowers and his children could sleep without nightmares of helicopters and gunfire. Yet even here, in the safest zip code, on the realtor's flyer, war found its way to his doorstep. Not with rockets or rifles, but with clipboards and counterfeit authority. At first it was petty, a citation tucked under his wiper blade for unauthorized vehicle, though his truck was parked neatly in his own driveway, a warning about his grass being a half-inch too long. Even as he'd mowed 2 days prior, a letter claiming his porch light bulb wasn't in community compliance because it was warm white instead of daylight white. Marcus, trained in patience, ignored them the way you ignore gnats, swatting only when they bite, but the men behind the citations, Ethan and Kyle, ex-junior cadets who never made it past reserve duty, decided that Marcus's calm was disrespect, that his refusal to bow was defiance. They started watching his house, driving slow at night with dash cams pointed at his windows, circling the block when his kids played basketball, standing just far enough on the sidewalk to claim they weren't trespassing, but close enough for their presence to feel like a line crossed. Marcus warned them once, his voice steady as stone. "Stay off my property. This isn't a playground for uniforms you bought online." They laughed, calling him tough guy, not knowing the depth of the truth behind those words, not knowing that the man they mocked had led teams into compounds halfway across the world, that his hands had broken down real doors, that his calm was forged under gunfire where one mistake meant funerals. Weeks passed, tensions sharpened, neighbors whisper behind blinds, and the HOA board, led by Linda, a woman who wore pearls like armor, backed Ethan and Kyle at every turn, calling them our community security detail, dismissing Marcus's complaints with a smug neutrality of people who think paperwork can erase injustice. But then came a morning that patience ended. Marcus was in his kitchen pouring coffee when a thunderous crash split the air, his front door jolting in its frame as Ethan and Kyle rammed it open, splintering wood, bellowing, "You're in violation." Marcus put the mug down gently, walked to the ruined doorway with the calm of a man who had entered far worse thresholds, stood there framed in the broken light, gray T-shirt stretched across muscle earned in silence, eyes steady, jaw locked, and said low and clear, "Wrong door, guys," as if shouting the phrase granted them authority. In that moment, the scene was no longer about grass or garbage bins or bylaws. It was about the collision between manufactured authority and real power, between 2 men who thought a clipboard and a badge patch made them untouchable, and a warrior who had spent his life fighting for a freedom they were now abusing. And though the neighbors gathered, gasping at the shattered frame, phones lifted to record, none of them could yet imagine how this story would end, that the HOA's arrogance had awakened not just Marcus, but the brotherhood of Navy SEALs who still stood ready to answer his call, and that by targeting the wrong man, the board had just declared war on warriors who knew exactly how to end it. The crash of the front door should have been the climax of a nightmare, but for Marcus Hayes, it was only the opening note of a battle he had long known would come, because men like Ethan and Kyle never stopped at warnings. They escalated, always needing a bigger show, always craving a stage where their petty uniforms could look like power, and now, with his children frozen at the top of the stairs and neighbors whispering through curtains, Marcus knew that ignoring them had only fed their arrogance. Still, he stood silent in the ruined doorway, letting the weight of his gaze hold him longer than any threat could, and when Ethan sneered, "You're out of compliance. Illegal modifications to your property," Marcus glanced at the broken doorframe and answered with a voice that carried command without volume. "You've just committed felony forced entry. Step back." His tone rattled him, though Kyle tried to recover, waving a citation form like a weapon, barking, "We have board authority." Ethan's bravado slipped for a split second as Marcus stepped into their space and said, board authority doesn't override the Constitution, the sheer weight of his presence making the air heavier. But still they retreated only enough to regroup, retreating to their pickup with threats of documenting this as resident aggression, snapping photos of the busted frame as though their crime was his fault. That night, Marcus replaced the door with his own hands, the sound of hammer and drill echoing into the cul-de-sac like the drumbeat of warning, and Angela, his wife, asked him if they should call a lawyer, if they should move, if peace was even possible here. But Marcus shook his head slowly, saying, "We don't run from bullies. Not overseas, not here." The following days brought escalation disguised as paperwork. 5 new fines in a single week, trash bins out of sight but visible from certain angles, unapproved satellite dish though none was installed, noise complaint at 2:14 a.m. though the family slept at that hour, failure to cooperate with security inspections though none were authorized, and each envelope dropped like an insult, each line item a reminder that the board, with Linda's signature at the bottom, intended to grind him down, not by force but by bureaucracy, which was its own kind of violence. Others posted online about troublemakers in the community, echoing the HOA's narrative that Marcus was hostile, unstable, and unwilling to respect the rules we all agreed to, while others whispered apologies at the mailbox and slid glances toward Ethan's truck as if afraid of being caught talking. One night, Marcus's son came home pale, admitting Ethan had cornered him at the corner store, asking if his father still thought he was special now that the neighborhood was turning against him. Another evening, Angela spotted Kyle parked 2 houses down, camera lens pointed squarely at their living room window, and though she reached her phone, Marcus stayed her hand, saying, "Let them record. Every second they keep that camera on us is evidence they'll regret." Yet inside, Marcus felt the gnawing edge of fury, the kind that hung beneath his skin like an engine too long idling. He began meticulously recording everything, a habit he had developed during deployments, times, dates, interactions, even screenshot of HOA app posts that were peppered with passive-aggressive venom, and sent evidence packets to a Navy lawyer friend, who calmly informed him over the phone, "This isn't just harassment. This is targeted intimidation. Sit tight. Make the case." But sitting tight wasn't in Marcus's blood, not when his family's safety was at stake. And the tipping point arrived the following Saturday when he returned from a jog to find his driveway blocked by the HOA's makeshift security truck. Ethan leaning against the hood with arms crossed, Kyle standing nearby with a clipboard, both of them smirking as if the asphalt under Marcus's boots now belonged to them. "We need to inspect your home for unauthorized modifications," Ethan declared, voice pitched loud enough for neighbors to peek out, and Marcus stopped 2 feet away, sweat still glistening from his run, muscles coiled but voice steady. "You're not stepping into my house." Kyle waved a folded paper, like it was scripture. "Board resolution gives us access when a property is suspected of violations." Marcus smiled then, not amusement, but the dangerous calm of a man who has lived through ambushes. "That piece of paper," he said, "won't stop me from defending my home. Try it, and you'll find out what a real resolution looks like." The tension crackled. For a long second it seemed Ethan might push, his hand drifting toward the baton clipped at his belt. But something in Marcus's eyes, the unflinching steadiness of a man who had stared down warlords and mercenaries, made him falter, mutter something about noncompliance, and retreat to the truck. The battle had gone quiet for that moment, but Marcus knew the silence was only temporary, because bullies don't quit when they lose. They plot, they regroup, they escalate again. And sure enough, 2 nights later, the real escalation came. Marcus returned home from picking up groceries to find his lawn spray painted with the word violator in red, the HOA's printed notices stapled to his front door like warrants, his mailbox stuffed with duplicate fines, his wife shaken and furious, his children upstairs pretending not to cry. He stood in the yard under the pale glow of the streetlight, surveying the vandalism, the humiliation, the attempt at psychological warfare, and he felt the line inside him finally harden. Enough. These men wanted to play at power. They wanted to mimic uniforms and act like soldiers. They had no idea what a real soldier looked like when he stopped holding back. So Marcus walked inside, set down the groceries carefully, lifted his phone from the counter, and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. A secure line, answered on the second ring by a voice that said, "Commander? Been a while." Marcus exhaled once, steady, like a man who had finally accepted the war brought to his doorstep. "I need the team," he said. And on the other end, there was no hesitation, only the steel reply of loyalty forged in fire. "Say when, say where." The call went out like a flare that only a few brothers would ever see, and by dawn the following weekend, Marcus's quiet street, with its clusters of identical homes and mailboxes, was being watched from angles that the HOA camera couldn't see. They arrived in pairs, unannounced, not in uniform, but in the disciplined plainness of men who knew the weight of silence. Weather ball caps, jeans, boots, jackets zipped against the morning chill. These were Asil brothers, men who had once cleared compounds in the Hindu Kush, who had dragged each other bleeding through dust and ocean alike, who had buried teammates, and carried their names like medals. Now, for Marcus, they were here, not because of war or orders, but because loyalty outlives both. They didn't storm in. Instead, they watched first, merging into joggers, delivery vans, and repair crews to map the neighborhood's rhythm. They observed Ethan and Kyle making their menial patrols, standing with their arms crossed like counterfeit cops, and taking pictures with their phones of Marcus's shrubs. They saw Linda glide into the clubhouse in her SUV, pearls sharp against the steering wheel, unaware that the gaze on her now wasn't a neighbor's annoyance, but a sniper's patience. When Marcus briefed him in his garage, beneath the exposed beams and the faint smell of motor oil, he didn't ask for revenge. His voice was calm, clipped, as though he were back at a mission table. "We're not here to fight. We're here to show them the difference between pretending to have power and actually having it. We use presence, strategy, discipline. Nothing more." Heads nodded. No argument, no need. They trusted Marcus as they always had, because he never led them wrong. Outside, Angela and the kids peeked, watching men who move with quiet menace, their very posture a lesson in authority. One of the team, Torres, crouched to Angela's level and said, "Don't worry, kiddo. Nobody's going to bang on your door again. Not with us here." And Angela, seeing the ire in his eyes, almost believed him. 2 nights later, under a large harvest moon that transformed the cul-de-sac into a stage of silver and shadow, the moment arrived. After Marcus refused compliance, the HOA convened a late-night emergency meeting at their headquarters, the clubhouse that smelt like carpet cleaner and lacked authority, to discuss the Hayes situation. Marcus let them gather. Let Ethan and Kyle strut in wearing their green jackets, radios crackling nonsense. Linda perched at the head of the table with a folder of citations stacked like ammunition. Then, at precisely 8:07 p.m., the double doors opened, not with violence, but with the slow certainty of inevitability, and Marcus entered flanked by his Seal brothers. The effect was instant and electric. The room, accustomed to the petty dominance of HOA rituals, suddenly shrank under the gravity of men who carried themselves with lethal calm. They did not yell. They didn't posture. They simply walked in with the kind of discipline that makes space bend around it. Ethan's hand twitched toward his belt, but Torres fixed him with a stare so cold it pinned him to his chair, without a word. Linda's voice, usually sharp and sure, cracked when she stammered, "This is a private board session." But Marcus laid a thick binder on the table with sound like a gavel. Every page inside meticulously logged evidence of harassment, intimidation, unlawful entry, vandalism. He spoke evenly, letting silence fill the spaces between words. "You've overstepped your authority. You broke into my home. You targeted my family. That ends tonight." Kyle muttered, "You can't threaten us." But his words died when another Seal leaned forward just enough to let the room feel his presence. Marcus didn't smile, didn't rage. He simply opened the binder to photographs of the smashed door, the spray-painted lawn, the time stamps from his cameras, the printed HOA email signed by Linda herself. "This is a federal case now," Marcus continued. "Every page here is already with my attorney and the county prosecutor. What happens next depends on how you act in this room." The weight of his calm pressed harder than any shout could. Neighbors who had come to spectate through the clubhouse windows whispered in awe as they saw the board, one smug in their rules, silenced by a man who had walked through real fire. And then Marcus delivered the final blow, not with fists or fury, but with truth sharpened into steel. "You came to my door yelling violation. Here's your violation: abuse of power, harassment, destruction of property. And you're going to answer for it." For the first time since they donned their pretend uniforms, Ethan and Kyle looked like what they truly were, small men caught playing soldier in a world that had just shown them the real thing. For a long moment the room sat frozen, the only sound a faint buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead, the smell of cheap coffee going cold on the table, and in that silence Linda's face drained of color, the recognition dawning that the empire she had built on intimidation and selective enforcement was nothing but a sandcastle facing the tide. Ethan shifted in his chair, knee bouncing, eyes flicking between a binder of evidence and the unblinking seals who lined the walls like shadows. Kyle opened his mouth twice, searching for words, but no sound came. Marcus stood in the center of it all, not shouting, not demanding, just existed with the full weight of a man who had fought for freedoms far larger than this cul-de-sac and wasn't about to let a group of petty tyrants strip them away in his own backyard. He closed the binder slowly, a motion that sounded like the end of an era, and spoke in a tone of finality. You wanted control, you wanted power. Now you'll face accountability. Every neighbor outside knows what happened here. Every word is recorded. You don't run this neighborhood anymore. His brothers didn't move, didn't need to. Their stillness was its own warning. For the first time, Linda lowered her eyes. We'll review procedures, she muttered, a pitiful echo of authority. Marcus leaned forward just slightly, voice so quiet the room had to lean into it. No, you'll step down, and this board, this fake security force you created, ends tonight. And in that moment, even the neighbors who once clapped emojis under the HOA's post felt the ground shift. They were watching power unravel, the costume torn away, leaving truth naked in the harsh light. The days that followed unfolded like a controlled detonation, loud, precise, leaving nothing standing that hadn't earned its place. Linda announced her resignation under the pretense of family reasons, but everyone knew the real reason wore boots and carried himself like a commander. The swagger of Ethan and Kyle had been replaced by the haunted look of men who had finally been recognized for who they were as they vanished from patrols with their radios and jackets stuffed into garbage bags at the curb's edge. The HOA security program was dissolved, struck from the bylaws in a hastily convened emergency session where residents who had once stayed silent suddenly found their voices, demanding fairness, demanding transparency, demanding to live without fear of fines and harassment. Marcus didn't attend that meeting. He was on his porch with his wife and children, fixing the door they had smashed, his SEAL brothers beside him helping measure, drill, set hinges, the laughter between them low and easy, the kind of laughter born from bonds stronger than time. Neighbors began to wander over, some with apologies, some with casseroles, some simply with shame in their eyes. Mrs. Jensen from 2 houses down brought lemonade and said, "I should have spoken up sooner." And Marcus, without bitterness, replied, "What matters is your speaking now." A week later, For the first time since he moved in, Marcus felt the balance shift. Instead of fear or suspicion, there was genuine respect growing where silence had been before. Ramirez invited Marcus to co-lead a block cleanup. His children rode their bikes without looking over their shoulders. His wife planted her flowers without watching for flashlights at the window. The cul-de-sac exhaled, finally, like a chest unclenched after holding its breath too long. Yet the greatest resolution wasn't the downfall of the HOA, but in what it built afterward. At the suggestion of Marcus's team, the neighborhood drafted new rules, not the suffocating kind, but the protective kind. A rotating community care committee replaced the enforcers, staffed by volunteers trained in de-escalation, fairness, and empathy. Meetings opened with a reminder that bylaws exist to serve people, not the other way around. Marcus attended one, not to dominate but to contribute, his voice carrying weight not because he was a SEAL, but because he was a neighbor. Strength, he told them, isn't about making others small. It's about making everyone feel like they belong. The room nodded, not out of fear, but agreement. Over time, the image of him standing in that shattered doorway became more than a story of intimidation. It became a story of triumph, told in whispers to newcomers. This is the block where they tried to bully a man who turned out to be a Navy SEAL, and he showed us all what real courage looks like. For Marcus, the final victory wasn't enforcing resignations or dismantling a fake police force. It was in the sound of his children laughing freely on the lawn, in the smell of his wife's flowers blooming unbothered by citations, in the sight of neighbors gathering under string lights in the clubhouse lawn to share food and stories instead of fines and threats. On one quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and painted the sky gold, Marcus sat on his porch with his family, ice cream bowls in hand, watching Angela and the kids play in the street, and when his wife asked, "Do you think it's really over?" he answered not as a commander, but as a man finally at peace. "It's not about it being over. It's about us taking it back." And we did. The camera of life pulled wide then, houses glowing in twilight, laughter spilling into the night, a young oak tree swaying by the mailbox where once the word violator had been scrawled, and at the center of it, Marcus Hayes, no longer just a Navy SEAL who fought wars abroad, but the man who reclaimed his home, his dignity, and his community, proving that even in the quietest neighborhoods, courage still makes the loudest sound.